What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. Today we are continuing our Hidden Gems series, and we're getting very close to the end of this series on Madden 21. Today we're actually going to be covering cornerbacks, and we're going to be following the same format as the last one, where we cover our top 10 players that I think you guys could get for a reasonable value that are, fit the bill of what I think a Hidden Gem player is, somebody that you could probably get for a reasonable price that's going to be potentially a long-term solution for your team. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. And the first player that we're going to talk about today is here on the Bengals. We're going to talk about Darius Phillips. And the reason that I think we should talk about Darius Phillips is simply the fact that he is the fourth corner on this team, with a team with three solid corners in front of him. And these corners aren't necessarily old in age. Trey Waynes is getting up there a little bit, but William Jackson is a clear starter, and so is Mackenzie Alexander in terms of their overall and age and everything in Madden, and that puts Darius Phillips out of a starting job, being that he is the fourth corner. He can't even play in the slot necessarily, and at 24 years old, a 74 overall, a relatively athletic player with 92 speed as the highlight there, and pretty decent acceleration, agility, change of direction, and those numbers. I think Darius Phillips is a player that you guys should certainly keep an eye out for. If there's any way that you could get him to add to your team, he could potentially start for you and be a very effective corner, so I see no reason to pass up on him. The next player that we're going to talk about is off of the Falcons. We're actually going to talk about Kendall Sheffield, and Kendall Sheffield is a player that could potentially be seen as a starter on this team, but I feel like there is a way that he could be available for you with the addition of Darqueze Dennard to this team. He is kind of a solidified starter for this team, and then in addition to that, they have drafted players recently that could also, in my opinion, take that spot. Guys like Isaiah Oliver, AJ Terrell Jr., and even guys like Jordan Miller and Tyler Hall. I mean, they have a lot of players at this cornerback position that could play those spots, and I've just picked out specifically Kendall Sheffield as the one that I feel like you guys should try to target because of his combination of physical attributes with the 93 speed, 92 agility, 93 acceleration, and 92 change of direction. Certainly one of the more athletic players on this list, and one of the ones that you're really, really going to want to pay attention to. Might be a little bit harder to get than most of the other players on this list, but somebody that you absolutely should keep an eye out for, keep a watch on. The next player we're going to talk about is actually a pretty new player to the Jaguars, and that is Sidney Jones IV, previously of the Eagles, but there's a very good reason why he's here. I mean, he's technically the fifth player on this depth chart. Now, if you are a Jaguars owner, you're probably going to find a way to start Sidney Jones, but with the drafting of young CJ Henderson as well as Trey Herndon being here, if you wanted to go with even just a veteran at the cornerback position, you still have, players in front of Sidney Jones before he can get on the depth chart. So with how many players this team has, and even other young guys that were drafted like Josiah Scott, who's even more athletic than Sidney Jones is and not that much lower of an overall, as well as Luke Barco and Chris Claybrooks, who is even by far more athletic than those other guys. I think that Sidney Jones is certainly attainable if you're looking to go out and trade for a corner. I think that he is a bargain add if you can probably convince the Jaguars to part ways with him, and I think you could very well convince them to part ways with him. So certainly Sidney Jones, somebody to keep an eye out for. The next one is going to be on the Lions, and we're actually going to be talking about Amani Oruwariye. Now, this one might be a little bit of a surprise, and I feel like a lot of you might not necessarily go after Oruwariye because he's not the most impressive person athletically. 89 speed, 87 agility, 87 excel, and 86 change of direction. He's certainly not the most impressive athletic player, but he's got a nice frame. He's 6'2", 205. He's a young guy, 24 years old, 71 overall out of Penn State, and he's a player that I've used many times, and he plays very well. He especially plays well as a slot cornerback, so somebody that you could bring in and have them be your slot corner as a long-term solution. The reason that he's available is obviously the two, veteran established corners here are Justin Coleman and Desmond Trufant, and then they drafted Jeff Okudah on top of that. So anybody past these top 3 corners is available for this team, and Amani Oruwariye is one of the better players. Now, the other player we're actually going to talk about here is Mike Ford. Mike Ford is on my list as well, and I like what they've done with Mike Ford this year. They've given him actually the respect that I think he deserves in terms of his athleticism. In prior years, he was slower, and so he was kind of on the fringe. He might be in as like a slot corner, but this year he's got 90 speed, 94 agility, which is absolutely off the charts. 94 agility, you can't beat that. 92 acceleration, and then 89 change of direction. Mike Ford is actually a very solid corner this year in Madden, and could potentially be a good starter for you on the outside. I like Mike Ford quite a bit. Actually, probably one of my favorite players on this list. And another thing to boot is that these guys are no slouches in terms of their ability to actually come down with the ball. Both Amani Oruwariye and Mike Ford have 70+ catching, so these are players that I think should be high on your list, and you guys should certainly target if you're trying to add corners to your team. The next player that we're going to talk about is actually on the Packers. We're going to talk about Perry Nickerson. Now, I could have chosen potentially other players on this list between guys like Kevin King, Josh Jackson, and Chandon Sullivan, being that these guys could potentially be there and available for you, but I really like what I see out of Perry Nickerson as a speed option. The 95 speed, 94 acceleration type of player. This is a guy that could do multiple different things for your team and just simply won't get burnt over the top from a speed perspective, and that is valuable to your team. Highly recommend you guys try to add Perry Nickerson if if this is what you're trying to do. If you're trying to target speed, this is one of the guys that I think could be available for you. He is a year older than guys like Sullivan and Josh Jackson, but that should just make him all the more attainable for you, because this team realistically should be looking to start their young guys in Kevin King as well as Jair Alexander, and then find whether Josh Jackson or Chandler Sullivan would be a better slot corner for you. I think Perry Nickerson is obviously an odd man out in this system, so certainly could be looking to move him. The Patriots I want to talk about here in a second. Now, this is going to count as one entry on this list. Every corner on the Patriots outside of Stephon Gilmore is a player that you should be on the lookout for. I couldn't specifically pick one player between guys like Williams and J.C. Jackson and Jonathan Jones, because I don't know what type of corner you might necessarily be looking for, but what I want to say is that as this entry on the list, you need to be looking at the Patriots and seeing which corner they would potentially be willing to deal away, because they have so many good corners on the roster, and you can't play all of these guys. They have 5 guys here. Even with the aging Jason McCourty, you can only play 3 of them. So even if they were, planning to get rid of Jason McCourty eventually, Stephon Gilmore is an absolute starter on this team. And then, I would say probably Jonathan Jones and J.C. Jackson are starters, but then you have a 22-year-old player here in Jojuan Williams, if I pronounce that correctly. Yes, he's a little bit lacking in the athleticism department, but he could be a very good add to your team, whether you want to just take him and move him to free safety, or you want to take him and play him as a slot corner or something like that. You could find a role for this guy, and he can't be that expensive for you to get because of how many players there are in front of him. You could probably get one of these guys for a half-decent price, and probably at a discount. You might be able to get, because the Patriots can't play all of these guys, you might be able to even get a Jonathan Jones or a J.C. Jackson at a discounted price. So you guys have to be on the lookout for the Patriots and what they're doing in your franchises, because they could be looking to add something on their part by dealing away one of these cornerbacks. The next player that I want to talk about is Isaiah Johnson on the Raiders. Isaiah Johnson here is all the way down on the list as a 24-year-old, 68 overall. But one of the things that I like about him is this team has obviously drafted pretty well at corner, I would think, in recent years with Trayvon Mullen, and then you've also got Damon Arnett Jr., and then you have other guys like Amik Robertson. You have a lot of guys here that are going to be competing at this cornerback spot, as well as established veterans like LaMarcus Joyner. I apologize, I'm tripping over my words here today. Isaiah Johnson is a player that is a really well-rounded, balanced, physically athletic player. You know, he's 24 years old, so he's still young enough that you can develop him into a solid player for you. He's a 68 overall, but he's got that 92 speed, he's got 90 agility, he's got 91 excel, and 89 change of direction. So he is very balanced, very well-rounded, and this is a player that if you're looking for a lower overall type of find, somebody that's not really going to cost you a whole lot at all, Isaiah Johnson might be that player for you. Highly recommend that you place him near the top of your list. The next player that we're going to talk about here, and the last one that is actually on a team, the 9th entry on this list, we're going to talk about Justin Layne. If you guys have followed my Pittsburgh Steelers franchise at all this year, Justin Layne has made a ton of plays. He's just an absolute monster, and as a slot corner, he plays really well. I'm trying to develop him up to the point that he can take over for Joe Hayden and be a legitimate starting outside corner. Obviously, in that league, I traded away Mike Hilton. So Justin Layne is a fantastic player. And outside of knowing that he plays really well on his own, if you just look at what his numbers are, this is a guy that should be probably in your top 3 players on this list because he's a 70 overall and a 22-year-old player. So he's got that best combination of overall and age, one of the better ones on this list. He's got 89 speed, which is just at that threshold where it's good enough. And, generally speaking, you're going to get some speed upgrades for him, so it shouldn't be a problem. 87 agility, 89 acceleration, and then 90 change of direction. Now, not a lot of these corners on this list have 90 plus change of direction, so that is one of the bonuses of Justin Layne. He's got really good change of direction. He's got really good ability to play the ball. Highly recommend that you guys check out Justin Layne as one of your first options if you're trying to add a player. And the other thing is that he's got a nice frame at 6'2", 192. He's a rather tall corner, and when you look at like the Steelers, like for me, one of my big things was I wanted to get a little bit bigger in the secondary, so I started playing Justin Layne and traded away Mike Hilton because that's a difference between 5'9" and 6'2". That's quite a bit of a difference, and Joe Hayden and Steven Nelson are 5'11". So Justin Layne is a very good option. That's enough said about that. Let's go ahead and talk about the last entry on our list. The last entry on our list here is actually going to be a free agent. And this one is obvious. This is the number 1 player on the list, and it should be the number 1 player on everybody's list. And it was the number 1 player last year for me as well. We're going to be talking about Grant Haley. Grant Haley is super obvious to add to this list because he is 24 years old. He's a free agent, so he's free for you guys if you're starting up a franchise out of Penn State. 71 overall, but that's not all. He's got 91 speed, he's got 97 agility, 91 acceleration, and then 96 change of direction. The combination of 97 agility and 96 change of direction is one of the highest, if not the highest, combinations in the game. It means that even though he's a low overall, you could play him right now, and I guarantee you that he would play like a star corner, simply because of the fact that he can get to the ball no matter where it's thrown, because he can break and change direction better than anybody else in the game, better than most wide receivers, probably I would say 99% of the wide receivers in the game. This guy is an absolute monster. Make sure that you guys go out and get Grant Haley if you haven't, or if somebody else has them or it's an AI team. Try to get Grant Haley onto your team because you could take him and start him right now, and you can transform him into one of the best corners in the league, and it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to do so. So that's the number 1 player on this list. Hopefully this helped you guys out. Those are my top 10 players, my top 10 hidden gem style players that you guys could add to your teams that are going to benefit you early on. Hopefully this helps you guys out. Like I said, if it does, leave a like on the video, comment down below for what you want to see next, and subscribe to the channel if you're new. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you guys have a good night. See ya.